Welcome, everybody, to Cambridgeshire County Council's Strategy and Resources Committee. It's good to see lots of people here today, and I will come back to that in a moment. The Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Could I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds at any point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will all make our way downstairs to the main entrance and turn left, and the muster point is at the far end of the building. If we could go to apologies for absence, and then I'm going to have a short moment to say something about the people who are present. Michelle.
Yeah, I have apologies from Councillor Hoy and Councillor Ambrose Smith is substituting, and apologies from Councillor Wilson and Councillor Slatter is substituting.
Apologies, but I believe you've been informed that Councillor King has replaced Councillor Hoy, and it's the apologies for Councillor Jonas King. That's not
my apologies. I was told that replaced as a spokes. I didn't put two and two together and take her off strategy resources, so
okay.
I will do in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to everybody who is here. This is an important meeting, and it's very good to have our members of the senior management team with us today. It's also extremely both pleasant and sad that we have Charlotte Black with us today at her last meeting of formal public meeting of the County Council, because Charlotte leaves us tomorrow, I believe. Charlotte has been an amazing officer of this council. She has served the people of Cambridgeshire brilliantly for many years, and we are very, very sorry to see you going, Charlotte. And I personally want to thank you so much for everything you've done for Cambridgeshire over the last, actually, I don't know how many years it is, and it's probably better I don't say, but a similar kind of time to the amount of time that I've been here, I think, and you've just been amazing all of that time, and it's not been easy. I know there may be some other people who would like to say thank you to Charlotte before we move on. I'm going to come to Steve first and then Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I really want to endorse everything that the Chair, Lucy Netzing, has already said. It's been a pleasure to work alongside you, Charlotte. The years that I was leader previously, the amount of support and the professionalism that you brought to your role, I found incredibly helpful, and I found it incredibly helpful under the current administration. I think you've been an excellent officer for Cambridgeshire, and we're sorry to see you go. Thank you very much.
Richard.
And it's entirely appropriate that all three main parties speak, and successive administrations, because you've served this council through different times, different political shades, different challenges, though, for the services that you've overseen. And as well as completely agreeing with that point about professionalism, what I would want to say is how much you really care about the services and the people who provide those services and the people who provide them. And I think you've been an inspiration to generations of people working for and receiving services from our council. Thank you very, very much.
Not quite yet, Richard, because I think Stephen wants to say something too, and it's possible that Tom does, but there will be many rounds of applause, I'm sure. Tom, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what yourself, Councillor Cairns and Councillor Howitt just said. I've always found you incredibly helpful with helping guide me and signpost. I know a lot of members have appreciated all your work over the years, and you'll certainly be missed by everybody, and wish you very well for the future. Thank you.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and clearly a non-political contribution to the debate. I just thought a few remarks from me as Chief Executive. First of all, to say that I am one of the people that remembers when Charlotte first started with the County Council. In fact, we both started at the same time in 2005. So I've had the privilege of working with Charlotte on 2 occasions now. In my view, Charlotte is an exceptional public servant. She exemplifies integrity, honesty, selflessness, and humility in everything that she does. She has brought a range of experience and wealth of knowledge to the role she's performed for the council, uniquely so given her background with public health, and then first in children's services, and then latterly in adult services. And of course, Chair, I also need to recognise that she's worked across both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough City Council for a number of years. Her leadership and contribution to this council's leadership team will be sorely missed, but obviously we wish her all the very best for the future. And I say that on behalf of not just myself and the corporate leadership team, but the officers she's responsible for in adult social care, commissioning and the broader people services team. So delighted we have this opportunity formally to wish her all the best today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And actually, there's one other person who's asked to speak, and that's Michelle. Michelle doesn't very often ask to speak.
Sorry.
So that's serious tribute.
It's not about Charlotte, who has been wonderful to work with. I just want to apologise for the heating in here. I'm afraid there's not a lot we can do about it. There is a fault. A sensor is being fitted tomorrow. We'll open as many doors as we can, but I'm afraid there's not much we can do today.
Thank you. So just to return, thank you very much, Charlotte. We will at this point give you a round of applause that I think is a very small mark of just how much affection and love we have for you and how much we will miss you. Thank you. Thank you. We will now come back to declarations of interest. Are there any, does anybody wish to disclose a pecuniary or non-statutory disclosable interest? I don't see any indications, but if at any point anybody does want to disclose anything, please feel free to do so during the meeting. We now come to the minutes. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting of the 16th of December 2022 as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? Thank you. I will sign. I see no objections, so I will sign those as an accurate record in a moment. We then move to the action log. The action log is in the published papers for this meeting. Most of the actions are complete with an explanation against the 5 which are ongoing. Are there any questions or comments on the action log? Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to comment on the action log 116 and specifically to the update on Shire Hall. I want to be clear that so it's the last sentence that I wish to refer to. All group leaders have received the same initial briefing prior to that session. I want to be clear that the briefing session we received was after the last meeting when our group discovered an unexpected overspend and the implications of that, which had not been highlighted to us previously. When asked what that was about at the meeting, it elicited an unexpected cloak and dagger answer, where it was once again clear we had not been given information that the leader was clearly privy to as she was a delegated consultation with regards to that. This sentence in this way infers that the group leaders received information at the same time as each other, which is clearly not the case. This sentence refers to what happened after that meeting. I think it's misleading. I think you may think that this is semantics regarding this sentence, but we have a confidential paper later on, and I want to be absolutely clear for the records to show that I and my group knew nothing about what was going on, whereas the leader, Councillor Lucy Netsinger, apologies, I've got a pop up and I have to be very careful about the words that I use because of the confidential paper going on. Sorry for that delay. We have a confidential paper later on. I want to be absolutely clear for the records to show that I and my group knew nothing about what was going on, whereas the leader, Councillor Lucy Netsinger, as she refused to go into private session last time, clearly did know something. This sentence muddies those waters, and I want the minutes of this meeting to reflect that, please. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I am happy to take away the wording of that sentence, but I also have some concerns about some of the things that have been said, but I think that we will not spend further time on that. I think that the wording of the action log could probably be re-examined, and we will do that. But I don't think it's appropriate for further discussion of that, of the other things that have been said to continue at this point. Are there any other comments on the action log? Edna.
Just to observe on that last point, I think it's really impossible for minutes to reflect what the state of mind and knowledge of individuals are. I think it can just be what was stated in the meeting and no more.
Thank you, Stephen.
Chair, on a separate item on the action log, I just wanted to update members of the committee. Item 117, this was in respect of the fair funding review discussion that we had at the last meeting of the committee. The action log references a draft letter being prepared for consideration by group leaders. Just to note that that draft letter has been prepared and was circulated for group leader consideration earlier this week. Once we have the feedback from group leaders and their agreement to sign that, we will obviously submit that to the Secretary of State. But I just felt that was an addition to the action log that was helpful to raise today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank whoever has found a fan. It's definitely getting cooler at this end of the room. I will be interested to know whether it's going to get cooler at the other end of the room. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Separate matter on the action log, and let me assure you before I start speaking that this is a completely non-political comment that I'm going to make, and I hope it'll be helpful and taken in the good spirit that's meant. On 117, the second point, Matthew Gunn is about the Cambridgeshire Music's plans, and I asked specifically about the outreach work to Fenland. We've received an email update, so that action is complete, but the email revealed that the number of schools receiving provision had reduced by 82% over 10 years, so hence not political, it's over 10 years. I accept that some of that was in our administration, and the number of staff providing that provision had reduced by 76%. It also, the response email also posed some considerations for how this may be improved. I replied to that email. I've had no response yet. I may have a response, it may be in my inbox, which is rather overflowing at the moment. But I'm asking you, Chair, I think that most of us would agree, and I hope you all agree, that music education is widely acknowledged to improve the overall education outcomes across the sphere. I think there's research to establish that. Therefore, one of the things that is holding Fenland back, which does have poor educational outcomes, would be to consider how to improve the take-up of music in Fenland. There are suggestions in the email of how that might be achieved. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't got any mechanism to monitor that suggestion on progress on that. So can I suggest that you consider how you would be able to monitor that and actually take that through if it's at all possible? My suggestion would be it'd be ideal for the Cosmic Committee, but I just leave it to you. It has got some good ideas in there. Just to consider how we might actually progress with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that comment. I was very interested to read the briefing that came out following that request. And I think that the reduction in music provision in Fenland that has taken place over the last 10 years is something that I take very seriously. I remember very clearly the sadness with which I saw changes to the contracts on which music teachers were provided under the previous administration, and the reductions in support for the Music Hub. And I do think it's something that needs to be looked at. I mean, we've looked at the figures for Fenland now because they were asked for, and I'm pleased that they were asked for because it's pretty shocking. I'm also keen that we investigate what's happening in the rest of the county, actually. And your points about the value of music education are extremely well made. And I would love to see us being able to make sure that rather than a reduction in provision, that provision then is growing over the next 10 years. So I'm very happy to take that away. I think it's something that probably sits more with CYP than with Cosmic. but it's certainly something that you won't be surprised to know is very close to my heart, and I'm keen that we look at it not just for Fenland but for music provision across the whole county. Thank you for raising that though. I don't see any further hands on the action log, at which point we will move on. So the next item on the agenda is the Children's Services IT. Oh, sorry, there are no public questions or petitions for this meeting. So we will move to item 4, which is the Children's IT Service Procurement. And the Interim Assistant Director for Children's Services will introduce the report.
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Over to you whenever you're ready, and we can see and hear you.
Sorry, hi all. It's just quick heads up. Charmaine can't hear us, so I'm communicating with her so she can introduce the paper.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charmaine Rents, Assistant Director, Children's Social Care, and I'm here to talk about the procurement of the current Cambridgeshire Children's and Early Help System, Liquid Logic, which went live in January 2022. It's proposed that we procure the system for an additional 5 + 2 years. The service requires a stable solution, and we'll continue to use and benefit from the significant investment that's been made so far. The Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee have approved this proposal. And just to say, I do apologise, I cannot hear you, so I cannot hear any questions or queries you might have, but my colleague Chris is here, so any questions you might have, you can just he can respond. Apologies.
Thank you, Charmaine and Chris. Chris, if you could
Good
send
morning.
Charmaine at some point, that would be very helpful. Does anybody have questions for Chris? Councillor Count.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned by the contents of the paper, but I am a little bit concerned about the governance on this issue. I believe the role of the Children's Committee is to submit this to the S&R for approval for a request for funding. It's not simply okay to use the approval of the Chair and Vice Chair, so the committee should be able to examine this in detail. I just don't understand why this didn't happen on this case.
If I can try and respond to that, Councillor Count, and thanks for the question. The Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee were consulted and have approved the requirement on previous occasions for the procurement of an IT solution. It comes through Strategy and Resources Committee for approval.
Steve, is your point that it should have gone to the Children and Young People's Committee rather than just the Chair and Vice Chair? I can see that argument. I think given that it needs to come here for procurement, there's a question about double, whether things come to 2 committees, but I'm happy to come to Tom, who I think wants to come in on this one.
Chair, it's just to confirm that because this is an IT budget, a corporately held IT budget, albeit the Children's Service is clearly the prime customer, the decision making about the procurement does rest with Strategy and Resources Committee. So that's the strict kind of constitutional answer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item, Richard?
Just check on the content of the paper now, is that right? Yeah. So one is I'm fully supportive of this, but the problem with all of these IT contracts, and whether it's Cambridgeshire County Council or other local authorities, it's the same. We don't have peculiar differences or challenges here, is that you get locked into a long contract that's inflexible, increasingly doesn't meet needs as needs change, or it's expensive to be able to deal with them. And then transitioning out of it is very difficult because contractors don't have any great economic incentive to be able to do so. And so there's been quite a lot written and said about contract flexibility and smart ways of building into contracts, ways of basically putting an obligation on the contractor to be able to be flexible and to cooperate. And we all know that our systems don't all talk to each other, and they don't talk to other agencies they need to talk to. And it's a complete bugbear, most of all for our staff, time consuming and wasteful and not in anyone's interests. But it's difficult to solve that just by snapping your fingers. So my point really is to just check and also exhort our officers that are doing the contract writing that as much contract flexibility is built in, that there is an obligation put on the contractor, him or herself, to seek innovation, to seek ways of achieving integration, harmonisation in the interests of the council and the services, and to fully cooperate in terms of the transition out of the contract in advance of either the +5 or the +7, so that we don't suddenly get to a cliff and end up in the same position again. This isn't peculiar to this contract at all. This is something about all of our IT. No one gets it perfect, but we need to learn from the difficulties. And I would hope that these comments are helpful in terms of the way that we implement this. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Chris, do you want to respond to any of that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Howard. Within the implementation of IT solutions, we do work with the suppliers to ensure that not only our requirements now are met, but there is opportunity within the roadmap and the development of the product itself and integrations with other solutions as required. Equally, as a service, we're aware of technologies that come on board and also work with suppliers to ensure that they are used where appropriate to enable those integrations to excel and provide a better service for the service using that product.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Lucy. Just a point was there's nothing in here to not support. It's absolutely needed. But just a question for understanding and checking. In 2.1, 2.1, says children's services have a large program of change. If I went to that program change and looked at the documentation, would I find a risk register of this not happening? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I would hope so, and I'm looking.
Well, I'm just, ever since I've become a member, I've been banging on about project and program management and its efficiency and how it should and shouldn't work and how it does and doesn't work. What I'm saying here is that this is just a very visual. We're very supportive of this. This is underpinning a major program of change. Okay, so I just want to know that this is actually totally integrated with the day-to-day operation of the people that are running that change.
I think Stephen's going to respond on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Goldsack for the question. So on the specific around risk management, yes, in terms of the procurement process and indeed the implementation, there will be a risk register that sits alongside that. More globally, each of the directorates, including Children's Services, has a full risk register, which would reflect technology-related risks and change. And of course, that then rolls up into the corporate risk register, which comes through to this meeting. We scrutinise that regularly, in fact, quarterly, formally through the corporate leadership team. That meeting recently happened, and indeed changes around technology and systems implementation was part of that debate and discussion. So yes is the answer to the question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen, for that very comprehensive response. I don't see any other hands, and I haven't heard any indications that anybody is not supportive of this. If there are any people who are not supportive of the recommendations, if they could indicate now, in which case I think we'll take that. Would you rather we all voted, Michelle? Okay. I think that we'll take that as those accepted without any against. So thank you very much. And we will move on to item 5. Thank you to Chris, if you could thank Charmian as well, that would be very helpful. Thank you both.
Already done. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So item 5 is the electricity procurement, and we have Sarah Wilkinson and Cheryl French to introduce this paper.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Great. So thank you. There's a few things I just wanted to make clear about this paper. Firstly, this is about the contract for supply of electricity for a 4-year period from October 2024 to September 2028. That may seem a long way away, but electricity will be traded on wholesale markets, typically 12 to 18 months in advance. So that's why we need to be looking at that now. Secondly, the contract value is very hard to predict for 2 main reasons. Firstly, there's uncertainty on the volumes of electricity that we're likely to be using in that 4-year period. We know that it's going to go down considerably because of changes to street lighting, but there will also be other increases in electricity use for example, low carbon heating and electric vehicles over the years. So at the same time, we've got a very volatile energy market at the moment, so prices are uncertain as well. So we've made a central estimate with some sensitivity analysis in the paper on what that is likely to be with the information we currently have. It will be a flexible price contract. No option is going to give us fixed prices. It's not the same as when you choose your electricity supplier at home. For our sort of supplies, you don't really get that same option. So I am recommending option 1 to you, which is to renew the contract with ESPO that we have at the moment due to a number of benefits that we get from this option. These include that the fully compliant procurement process has already been completed in advance for us. ESPO do all of that. A record of excellent customer service that they provide to us, provision of market intelligence, which has been very useful, and a strong record of their energy trading team performing very well to secure us good prices relative to the market position. And lastly, as mentioned in paragraph 2.22, there is also the option to net off our purchased electricity with the volumes generated and exported from our own solar farms. So obviously we're buying electricity to use, and at the same time we're selling electricity from our renewable assets. And once North Angle Solar Farm goes live later this year, we will actually be generating 2 to 3 times as much electricity as that we are using per year. And I just wanted to add, because since publishing this paper, my team and colleagues in finance and procurement have had further discussions with ESPO and Total and confirmed that this option to net off our imports and exports is indeed available to us should we wish to take it up. We're still working out the financial details of this, so that will no doubt come back to a future committee. But the big advantage of going ahead with that is that it would enable us to self-supply our own REGOs, avoiding the need for the supplier to purchase these for us. And it would effectively mean that we'd be using our own 100% green electricity generated here in Cambridgeshire. So that is something else that the ESPO option offers us as an optional extra, if you like. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Sarah and Cheryl, because I know a lot of work's gone into the preparation of this paper. Before we move to the debate, I think that there is an amendment to the recommendations on this one. So I don't know whether you would like to introduce that now, Steve, and then we can have the debate after that.
Okay, I have one question, if I may, before I move that amendment, which is come to light, which is relevant to the amendment. So the amendment discusses the possibility of going with Beyond. Have you had the same questions of Beyond as to whether they would do a net off on the, because that's not covered in the paper?
We haven't had that discussion with Beyond, but there's no indication that Beyond offer those type of services. It's not mentioned on their website. It's not something that I've heard. We've spoken to other councils as well who use them.
Thank you. Chair, in view of that answer, which is we don't know is the answer. We don't know what we don't know. The amendment specifically states that we should swap to Beyond, but I'd like to amend the amendment under the auspices of, if the chair allows it, under the things that I can't remember the significant, something that significantly comes to light in the meeting, you have the powers to allow a further amendment. And I would suggest that I add the words to the amendment, subject to discovering whether Beyond do a netting off or would agree to a netting off procedure, because that would make a major difference financially. So without that, I would not see the amendment as standing. With that, I would see I would see the amendment as standing. If they don't do that, then the amendment would fail and you'd go for option 1. I hope that's agreeable.
So I think that's a question for me as chair about whether I'm willing to take an alteration to the amendment.
Councillor Count is quite correct. You do have the discretion, if something unexpected arises at the meeting, to actually allow a change.
So I accept that this is new information, and I think it's reasonable to make that change. I'm just wondering whether it's something that we can clear up in the meeting about whether there's more information that the officers can give us about whether Beyond do offer that, because if you know that they don't, then that also has a material impact.
I can't answer that for certain. I don't think they do, but I would need to double check. That's not something I'll be able to verify completely today.
There's a question about whether it would be possible to find that information out during the meeting, at which point we could come back to that at the end, but it doesn't look as if it's like, you're shaking your head, so I suspect the answer to that is no.
I don't think I'll be able to find that out today, I'm afraid.
Okay, I think I'm willing to accept the alteration to the amendment, and we will then, so we will now have a discussion about the amendment and about the contract. So I'm happy to accept that change, and I'm now opening the debate on both the paper and the amendment. Does anybody have Steve?
Chair, I think it might be useful if I actually read out the amendment.
Yes, I think it would.
Yeah. So the amendment is to it was resolved to A, and it's subject of A, and basically, rather than going to the full details, instead of going with option 1, which is the ESPO framework, is to go with the Beyond one. Okay, so that's the nuts and bolts of it. But on the basis of the information just received, should we discover that Beyond do not offer that netting off, then we agree that option 1, as previously recommended, would stand. So just in talking to why why our group has decided to put this one forward, there are 2 reasons, one of which is the green effect. I'm quite comfortable with the ESPO and the total transport. We've been using it for years. I think we know it's green. It's got certification for it's green, but there is the element of the company that supplies it also has fossil fuel interests, and therefore there's an alternative to go with Beyond, which would be a totally green tariff supplied by somebody that's totally green. So that's one bit, but that for me isn't the major reason for actually asking for that we go with Beyond. The major reason for asking we go with Beyond is actually the energy market at the moment. I think everybody knows that the volatility in the energy pricing market at the moment is absolutely immense. And therefore, when somebody offers us a contract for 18 months time in the future, as we heard, it's 12 to 18 months, ESPO are working essentially to an 18-month time frame, and the Beyond one is a 6-month delay. So they will be purchasing stuff at a later point in the cycle, closer to the end game. In 6 months' time, every indication in the market is at the moment is that the volatility will have decreased, not necessarily the prices, the volatility will have decreased. When somebody sells you energy, they price in the risk of volatility as well as the predicted pricing. So therefore, there is, in my opinion, a clear shall we say, a clear way that you would expect the pricing in 6 months later in the cycle to be lower than now. So the risks to it being lower are greater than the risks to it being higher. That's my opinion, because of that lack of volatility. So that is the main crux of the reason for going with Beyond rather than ESPO, is because that additional 6 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I can see that Sarah's indicating, so if we come back to you, Sarah.
Yes, if I can just make a point of clarification on that one. Whilst we would need to sign up if we went with the ESPO option 18 months in advance, it doesn't mean that they would do all of the trading. It means that they trade at different times throughout that period. They might buy some here and some there, depending on what the market looks like.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. I think we can now understand the amendment, so thank you for that and the reasons for it. Sarah, do you want to come back again?
Apologies, there's just Cheryl's reminded me of one other point of clarification, just on the option 2 with the Beyond DPS framework. Is just to say that we may or may not get a different supplier. I know that Total Energies are also on that framework as well. So you could end up with the Total through that option as well, or you could end up with a number of other suppliers who are also on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments on this, Lorna?
Thank you. The paper presents 4 different options for how we might go about this procurement, and I think 2 of them are fairly readily knocked out as being not reasonable or sensible options to pursue, leaving the recommendation of the officers to renew with ESPO with the same supplier that we have had indeed for the last few years, or as in Councillor Count's amendment, to sign up with Beyond. With Beyond, as has been said, we don't know what we would get. However, the market is limited in terms of suppliers, many of whom will have similar issues to Total Energies, and will be very involved in fossil fuels. There will be a couple of others who are renewable energy companies, but the suggestion, as I understand it, is that it's not clear that they would necessarily have the capacity and capability to deal with a customer of our size and complexity. So, as has been said by the officers just now, it's entirely possible that in choosing to go with Beyond, we could actually go by a more circuitous route to come back to exactly the same supplier, Total Energies, possibly at a less advantageous price, and possibly, depending on the any further inquiries that may be made Beyond, possibly without the benefit of being able to do the export contract that we know is already on offer through the ESPO framework and contract that's on offer. It's not clear, therefore, that that's the case with Beyond. And Beyond, it's been useful to have Beyond as a point of comparison, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that we should rule Beyond out for the future. The question is whether we are ready to take that step now. The one thing that does occur to me, when it was indicated a couple of months ago, that this paper would be coming to this committee, there was a deadline to sign up or bail out of the ESPO contract for 2024 onwards of the end of January. We're now talking about that being April, I believe, if memory serves me right. And if members wanted to achieve greater certainty about whether Beyond the suppliers through the Beyond framework were able and happy to offer that kind of that export contract, it occurred to me that it might be possible to defer this item to the March meeting of the committee to await further information. But what I would want to know from officers is, would there by March be sufficient information, firstly, about the potential for an export contract through Beyond, and secondly, more clarity about the market and who might be in a position to be the end supplier there, to make it worthwhile deferring to March. We've heard that the financial impact, may or may not be an issue. Would there be more certainty in March? Would we know about the export for Beyond, and would we know about which potential suppliers might be in the frame through Beyond by the March meeting?
Yes, we would certainly be able to find out by the March meeting whether or not Beyond offer an export contract option. In terms of which suppliers are on their framework, that we can look that up now as a whole list of suppliers, but that's slightly different to which ones would actually bid for it and which ones would be interested in and capable of supplying us.
Chair, if I can come back, it sounds as if we will have some greater clarity. We would have clarity about the export contract, but not much more clarity about whether we would end up with a different supplier through that. I wouldn't be averse to suggesting to you, Chair, that we might want, if we can, to defer the item to the March meeting for that greater clarification, because we would still be in time. However, if you felt it was not advisable to do that, then I think I would want to align myself with the officer recommendation and not with the amendment.
Thank you, Richard.
May I wait for your answer to Councillor Dupre's question before I contribute?
Sorry, you wanted the officers to answer that question?
No, Councillor Dupre put a question to you about whether you
about
might be
deferral.
minded to defer.
I would not be uncomfortable with deferring if that's a better option, but I am also wondering whether there might be a way of making an alteration to the amendment that would mean that actually if we find that Beyond cannot offer that, we do not need to bring it back to another meeting. So I think it's possible that we might be able to do some rewording that means that if we find that option is not available via Beyond, we can just get on with this. I'm going to come to Richard and then
it's on that point that is what the alterations to the amendment you accepted states. So if Beyond isn't able to offer that, the amendment would fall and we would go to option 1 by default, and I'm comfortable with that. So if in between this meeting and whatever, it would automatically fall out and go to option 1. That was the intention of the alteration.
Thank you for that clarification. Richard.
I don't want to speak against the recommendations or indeed what Councillor Dupre has said, because I believe she's been following this much more closely than I have. But what makes me uncomfortable about Total Energies is that they don't align with the Paris targets on climate change. They're doing increased investment in fossil fuels. And so just having an ESG fund and saying that's jolly good for the climate isn't consistent with the other positions that company takes. And if we've got some time between now and March, I would like the officers to reflect on that, because I don't think that we should be deeply proud in terms of our climate strategy with this decision.
Thank you. I think that there are a number of us who are aware of the irony of some of the decisions that we're being forced into making. But I do also think that the option of being able to buy back our own energy is a really important one. And if this is the only way that we can do that, then it is a sensible option. Neil.
Yeah, so I'm sort of in favour of actually doing a little bit of further thought on this with respect to the offsetting as well, because it's not quite simple as just having an offset deal, because what we've heard is a great deal of uncertainty about what our requirements are, both on the demand side and on the supply side. So it's also an issue of how these suppliers would cope with that uncertainty. Because one way is to offset, but the other is to actually sort of do it much more short term in terms of matching your purchasing requirements. So I think it's a bit more of a discussion, I think, than a simple yes, can you offset, or no, can you not offset, with both ESPO and beyond, as to how they would propose to deal with the our generation capabilities as well as the uncertainty. So, you know, for the sake, if it doesn't affect the decision, I think just having a few of these questions answered would also be helpful. I think a more general discussion as well about them is to Councillor Count's point is, what is their contracting strategy? What is their ideas? Is it sort of total flexibility, or is it sort of, you know, even beyond here, it talks about the contracts could be for 2, 3 or 4 years. So it could well be they go to market in one block as well. So I think there's a little bit more color, if I can call it that, which would be useful for us to understand what the various suppliers offer. It may well be that it's a distinction without a difference, is that actually they both have very much the same stance towards how they will contract electricity, but we don't really sort of see that from this paper at the moment.
Thank you, Neil. Mark.
Yeah, just a very quick point. If we look at 2.21, there's 4 options laid out with the comparison of options. We've discounted options 3 and 4 quite correctly. And I think Councillor Howett nailed it. Option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is a choice for a primarily oil and gas company, as written in the notes. Absolutely, that's what we're choosing. So the ESG message on here is this administration has chosen to go this way. The amendment is to say we could maximise the chances of an ESG friendly selection. If not, we've got a default. That's exactly what the amendment says, which is why I'm firmly behind the amendment on this one.
Thank you. Are there any, Sarah?
Thank you. I might be able to just provide a bit more information in response about uncertainty of the offsetting option. What ESPO in total would do with that is they would take a very detailed look at our generation data. So they look at data down to a half-hourly period. So they look at all the data that we're currently exporting from Triangle Farm, which is obviously already going, and then they look at our forecast data from North Angle, which is coming on later this year, and they can very accurately predict what that will generate, and then they look at what we're using, again down to the half-hourly data, and what they do with that is they would they then charge a balancing and shaping service to sort of, because it doesn't match exactly at the exact half hour you want to use it, but the amount we're generating is a lot higher than what we're using. So you'd still get your electricity bill as normal, and then separately we'd be paid income for the exports. The other thing to bear in mind is that the export would want to start sooner, because our current export contract expires October 2023, and they would be able to offer us to follow on that and then line it up, you know, an initial 1 year, and then line it up in October 24 when we need the import to be renewed. Yes, I think we've already covered this well, that with the suppliers on the other one, we don't know whether we'd get a green supplier or not. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say where I feel that I would like to be on this decision, which is that I think that in an ideal world, and I don't think this is quite what the amendment says or quite what the recommendation says. So I'm wondering whether we can ask for some assistance or whether we can try and get to this place. If we find that Beyond were able to offer us the buyback option, I think that there might be some more work that we need to do with looking at Beyond and looking at how they can what kind of provider we might get with them, in which case I think deferral would be a good option, and then we can bring it back to the next meeting. If, however, we find that Beyond cannot offer us that buyback option, I don't think we do need to discuss this again. I think at that point it's relatively clear that we need to go with ESPO. So what I'm wondering is whether we can make an alteration to the amendment so that it does that, rather than making a clear decision in favour of Beyond. But that would require, I think, Steve to make that change because it is his amendment. Michelle,
if I can just come in. So the amendment that's been submitted by Councillor Count actually deletes obviously most of the recommendation in there. So in relation to recommendation A, you have approve, and then the rest of it is deleted, and then there's the amendment wording added, together with the additional wording Councillor Count has put regarding the issues raised today. The only problem with that, it doesn't actually say that we go with the recommendation today if what happens doesn't happen. And I think we would have to probably add that to the amendment in order for that to happen.
That was my understanding of what I was suggesting. So I'm quite comfortable if we all understand that. I think we all understand that. If the officers just put forward the writing to make that happen, all right, because it's on the spot thing. I'm not seeking to influence or politicize, but basically, if Beyond is able to offer a trade-off the same way that a similar way, netting off the production as well as the usage, then we go with Beyond. If they're not, it automatically defaults back to option one, the ESPO contract, without having to come back here. So that was the intention of
So that's not quite what I said, and that's why I think there's a slight difference here, because what I was suggesting is that if Beyond are able to do that, we might want to bring it back to the March meeting rather than making a clear decision.
Yeah, I understand that, Chair. I wasn't going with what you were talking about. I was clarifying what Michelle was talking about, which hasn't got the additional bit that you've got. If we could discuss that in one moment. I do have a question that's been brought out by the latest piece of information that come out. So the latest piece of information, if I understand this correctly, Sarah, is you said that there is a separate energy generation contract that comes to an end in October, and that doesn't form part of this contract. Is that correct?
Yes, so currently we have a power purchase agreement on Triangle Solar Farm, and that is to October 23. And the aim is to get a renewal on that power purchase agreement, or a new buyer to that Triangle Farm contract.
But if, for example, we went with the ESPO one today, where we know they do that, that procurement exercise would not then be necessary. Is that correct?
That's right.
In which case, Chair, there's something slightly wrong here, because the paper that we've got is about the procurement on the supply of electricity. We've discovered during the process of this meeting new information that we're actually going to do possibly a double procurement exercise on which we've had no paperwork or knowledge, which is to automatically give the energy generation contract, which is coming to an end in October, automatically to the ESPO contract by signing up in this process. I don't know whether I feel comfortable or not about the figures involved in that, because they're not in front of us, but I do feel uncomfortable about the fact that we've suddenly ended up in this position where we're discussing two separate contracts, one which would automatically happen over the other one. I think that maybe there might be an understanding. Michelle wishes to come back.
Yes, so we have already taken a paper to Environment and Green Investment Committee around a procurement for optimization services, which would help us secure a PPA, if that's the way we wanted to go, for Triangle Solar Farm. So we're in the middle of getting the tender documents ready, and we've got a decision that we can go ahead with that.
I'm sorry, I'm getting more confused now. So we have a presentation to us today saying that if we go with ESPO, we'll be able to export energy. And then during the meeting, we discover that actually there's a separate contract gone through ENGI where we will export it that way. That's in the process at the moment.
it's a consultancy contract to help us get to the point that we can get the best prices for all of our large energy projects. And so there are two pieces on the table. There's one which is a negotiation potentially with either ESPO or Beyond, whichever moves forward, around what are the best prices that you could get for your electricity sales from our large energy projects. And there's also a procurement which is saying we have a range of energy projects, including St Ives Park and Ride and Babraham, which will be coming online, and saying how is it through the collection of our projects can we optimize income for our sites and assets that we've invested in. And that's what that second procurement is about, which we had support from EGI.
I'm increasingly thinking we need to defer this. In fact, I'm just going to come back to Sarah to ask whether if we did defer it to March, that would cause any significant issues.
I perhaps wouldn't say significant. I think ESPO won't like it. They're keen to they very reluctantly agreed to a small extension, but I think we could manage that. I also want to clarify that the export contract is not automatic by us signing this import contract. It just gives us, opens up that option to us. It would still be two separate contracts.
Thank you. I think if the downside is irritating ESPO, we can probably live with that. So my instinct is that actually we need to defer this item and we need to bring those two bits of information better together and bring it back in March. But I do actually want to say thank you to the members for a good discussion on this, because I think it's been useful and important. Is there anybody who would object strongly to us simply deferring this until the March meeting? Steve?
Not object strongly, but obviously we're late on responding to ESPO already in this procurement exercise. That's in the papers. If the delay causes more than irritation and causes them to say, actually, this isn't going to work out too well, can I suggest that we have a meeting in February? We're quite used to having monthly meetings in the past. There'd be no reason not to have a meeting rather than have quarterly meetings.
If that ends up being necessary, I'm quite sure that we will be willing to bring it back, but let's hope it isn't. At which point I think we will defer this issue. But again, I do want to say thank you to Sarah and Cheryl for the work that they have done on this, because I think it's a relatively complex and fast moving area. But thank you to everybody. We will defer that item. And we will then move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the proposed business plan, which will be introduced by Tom, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Recommending the business plan to full council is one of this committee's most important roles of the year. I'm mindful that we have the chairs of a number of the service committees and chief officers in the room, available to talk about some of the service specifics within these proposals. So I'll focus my comments on the structure of the information before you, the overall financial of the reserves in those proposals. The reports before you start with the council's strategic framework and the 7 ambitions that have been set. In the finance tables that follow, we set out on a policy area by policy area basis and scheme by scheme the way that we'll deploy our budget and build up that budget request, considering inflation, demography and demand, pressures and savings, and how that changes year by year. Our financial strategies go on to outline, amongst other things, our response to the economic context facing the council, how our capital plans are affordable over the long term, and how we efficiently manage the council's cash flow to optimise our treasury management position. For the first time in this business plan, we also include a sustainable procurement strategy, which shows how we'll use our very considerable spending power and supply chains to further deliver on those ambitions the council has set. In the business case section of the business plan and in the covering report, we outline the triple bottom line assessment that's being used as part of this business planning process for the first time, and the impact that these proposals have not just on the council's finances, but also on environmental and social impacts. Turning then to the content of the budget proposals before the committee. It's very apparent, as the committee will agree, that inflation is the dominant issue and pressure that has been facing us across this budget, and that really became apparent during the process. It certainly wasn't apparent at the extent to which that would be challenging when we sat here this time a year ago. Inflation isn't the only concern. Demand patterns remain very unpredictable and changeable as a result of the pandemic, but in terms of their financial consequences, at least, we are seeing a more stable position emerge, and our forecasting more closely reflect the actual patterns of demand that are coming forward. But we do see price pressures and inflation right across the council's supply chain, particularly on energy costs, on construction costs, and in relation to the large number of services we provide that are reliant on labour costs, whether that's in social care or on the direct services that the council provides. At 2.7 in the report, we show the latest budget movements and the progress that had been made and reported up to the December committee. Despite the progress at that point, as a result of the uncertainties and pressures we faced, there was a further widening of the gap to 22 million for next year, and the committee will be familiar with the type of pressures we're seeing recognised there, particularly in waste management and home to school transport. We received the provisional local government finance settlement in late December, and the impact of that between additional grant funding and council tax flexibilities is that this budget is able to propose a balanced position for the coming year. At 3.72 in the report, we show the application of those grant funds and the proposed level of council tax to balance the budget for next year. At 2.8.12, though, we are quite clear that even totaling all of the additional grant that has been announced and focused on social care and the flexibilities the council has on adult social care precept, this council is facing a £30 million pressure next year on its social care services and only receiving £19 million of additional funding across the adult social care precept and that additional grant. The report then goes on to set out the context for the council tax decision that members have before them. And in concluding in the proposals in this report that a council tax increase is necessary, the context for the historic approach to increases is set out, the results of the consultation with people in Cambridgeshire, some of the socio-economic considerations and the additional funding that government has provided to billing authorities in terms of council tax support, as well as where we currently sit on council tax levels relative to other councils. And then returning to the table at 3.72, we show there that in the revenue position, we have an ongoing challenge in future years with significant budget gaps in years 2, 3, 4 and 5 onwards. Although I would say the year 2 gap has returned to a lower level than we've seen since we were planning budgets during the course of the pandemic. We also confirm that we have to maintain financial discipline, not just in revenue, but on capital, where we have restricted headroom for further borrowing against our current limits in future years. Despite those challenges, through this budget, the council directs its resources towards its ambitions and to focus on the needs of Cambridgeshire. In section 8, I comment on the robustness of the estimates we have before us, and in particular draw attention to the track record the council has of forecasting during the year for demand pressures and the comprehensive process we've followed in terms of identifying the likely impact of inflation moving forwards. But I would emphasise, as every year, that these are estimates, and of course we will see some variation. And in section 8, we also flag the risks and uncertainties the council's facing, particularly the reforms and changes that will be needed to our high needs block and patterns of demand in that area, waste management, which we've already spoken about, where there are major considerations ongoing, and some of our partnership funding risks and the levels of debt and borrowing we're facing, again, linked to our capital position. The next part of section 8 then focuses on the adequacy of reserves, and it is fair to say that this budget deploys additional reserves to a greater extent than we've seen in previous years, unwinding some of the additional reserves the council accumulated during the pandemic. I would characterise that use of reserves as sustainable. So we use one-off reserves for one-off pressures and investments. We have applied some reserves to meet our long-term pressures, but we are largely sticking to the previous plans that we set on that front and tapering away our use of reserves gradually over the MTFS. And crucially, we have a proportionate use of reserves, and the plan includes maintaining the general reserve at 28.5 million. The recommended level backed up by the assessment in the MTFS around where that the sensitivities our reserves and contingencies are set against. And in addition, we have appropriate earmarked reserves for specific risks and uncertainties. In concluding that assessment, I should just thank the excellent team of finance professionals who've supported me in producing this budget, and colleagues right across the council in this major collaborative effort. So overall, through the flexibilities government announced at the end of December, the council has a position where it can adopt a balanced budget for next year. This is a commendable achievement given the major inflationary pressures we're facing, the service reforms, complexity of demand, changes in patterns of demand, and the legislative and societal and economic changes we face and are confronted with across the wide range of services the council provides. So in the context of limited long-term certainty about our funding position, and a funding position that we continue to lobby on as unfair for Cambridgeshire, this is a comprehensive plan to meet the council's ambitious ambitions and how we will deploy resources to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. And I would like to add my thanks to the staff right across the council who have worked extremely hard to bring the council's budget to this position. It has been an absolutely extraordinary year in which to try and create a budget looking forward 5 years, because the unpredictability has been really extreme. And I think that the work that was done, there was a great deal of work that was done by many across the council, looking at savings, at how we can make sure that we are not just accepting all of the demographic growth in our older people's numbers, for example, to keep the costs down across the council. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who was involved in that work, because some of it was quite painful and difficult, and it has been hard work getting to this place. So thank you to everybody who has been involved in that. I'm now going to open the open for debate. So any comments or questions, and we do have the senior leadership team here to answer questions on details if there are questions on details, and also thank you to all of you, because I know that a huge amount of work went into this. Are there any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you're well aware, the Conservative group will be putting forward an amendment to full council because we're going to put forward that amendment. I'm going to save most of my comments for them. I assume my group will. I can't support the recommendations in front of us because that would fly in the face of the amendment that we're going to put forward. So I'll be voting against it, and I will restrain from any further comments unless something comes out during the debate today that I feel that needs comment on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Comments from anybody else? Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. It's a question for you rather than for officers. What is the point, year after year, of asking questions of residents, whether it's on the business plan or on the budget generally, on the subject of the rise in council tax, when you completely ignore the result of that survey and of the response? Now, in both cases, both on the business plan and on the budget, barely a fifth of the respondents actually support the position that this council is taking of having a council tax increase of 4.99% or more. Why do you ignore what the residents say? And given that you do ignore what the residents say, why do you bother carrying on asking the question?
So the simple answer is that there is a statutory requirement, as you doubtless very well know, Councillor Bowden. The slightly longer answer is that it is not surprising at a time when there is a cost of living crisis that people are not keen to go out and pay more council tax. I understand that as clearly as anybody else does. This is an extremely difficult time to be asking people to pay more tax. And I do not take that decision lightly. It is absolutely not what I would like to be doing when I know that many families across Cambridgeshire are really struggling with their energy bills, with the cost of filling up a car, with childcare costs, with a whole range of different increased costs. But I am also very aware that the vast majority of this council's budget goes on looking after the most vulnerable people in our society. And that if we do not raise the funding which government clearly expect us to raise, it is very clear from what has been said by central government that this is what they expect our spending power to be. When they are assessing Cambridgeshire's needs, they are taking into account the ability to raise council tax to this level, and that's what they are. When they tell us our spending power, that is what they are expecting us to do. So I am doing this reluctantly. I would like to put the question back to the Conservative Party as it happens. I'm not convinced that if there was a referendum in this country on whether people want to have their income tax thresholds frozen for the next year, you would get a response at which people would say, yes, I want to be paying more income tax. I don't think that anybody is raising taxes lightly, neither me nor the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but we have responsibilities to our residents, and I'm absolutely determined that we will make sure that those responsibilities are fulfilled. I think I've heard from both Councillor Count and Councillor Bowden. I just want to see whether there's anybody else before I come back to those people. Elisa.
I will just add, I mean, first of all, absolutely thank you to everyone who's worked with us on what we're in the process of bringing forward. It's been hard. It's always hard this time of year. There are two things I'd like to say. The first one is actually to add to what Lucy just said. Not only is there a statutory duty for consultation on the business plan, which has always been the case, but there's also statutory limitations about when and for how long you consult and what kind of questions you ask and stuff like that. When I was on the radio the other week and the presenter asked me, what did it feel like, towards the end of December where you were getting to, and I was like, it felt like we were on tenterhooks waiting for the kind of information we would get about what sort of support and spending power we were going to get from the powers that be. So there is absolutely no point trying to make a joke out of, well, why do you ask the question if you're going to ignore it? And why is government going to come on the 19th of December with a local government settlement that tells you this is the only option you've got? At some point, the circle needs to be squared or square needs to be circled, and you know what I mean. The other part of the thing I would like to say is that, when Lucy started the debate by saying how extraordinary a year it's been in terms of budget setting, I was having very, very strong deja vu because I remember saying the exact same thing last year. Last year, we were in possession of leftover reserves from a cash dump we got during COVID, which was great as far as it went. At some point, cash dumps, as reserves indeed do, finish. We are a very revenue poor council. And being a revenue poor council in a very growing area, in a year where we have had the economy absolutely thrashed to pieces. This is not what we were expecting last year when we were saying we're facing uncertainty because we don't know what's going to happen coming out of the pandemic. When the pandemic funds dry up, we don't know what's going to happen. That was what we meant by uncertainty last time. This time we've got inflation up 5 times what it was. We've got guilds through the roof. We've got, which is something that will come back in terms of, across the council, we're having influence, things that are happening to us because of the state of the economy. So that what we meant by uncertainty last year was we didn't expect, we didn't mean we thought the government might absolutely crash the country. Well, indeed, that's happened. So maybe we should stop worrying about uncertainty, because if that's what happens, maybe we should start trying to use different words. But there is no point trying to use the results of a consultation as if they were everything we've got on the table. If government wants us to do different things, they've got more powers than we do to get us to do what they would like. So you know, I wouldn't go down that road if I were you.
Any for Tom?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you could just clarify, was it the case that the government announced, I think it was just before Christmas, they triumphed this 9.5% increase for core spending for English local authorities, but that was dependent on going for the 4.99% council tax increase. And had we not done that, that would really, as you said, weakened our spending power. I mean, I know that the funding formula, which we lobby them for regularly, takes no account of population growth. And I think some of the mechanisms government uses are actually 20 years old. So I think that is one of the key problems we face. But if you could just clarify that first point, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, would you be willing to pick that up?
Yes, on that first point, that's correct. That increase in spending power does assume maximisation of council tax. I think about half of that increase of spending power is attributable to a maximum council tax increase.
Tom, I don't know whether you'd like to say anything about the other point that Councillor Sanderson raised on the impact of the settlement and expectations about our population size, because it does have a huge impact on what our funding ought to be.
Yes, it remains concerning really for the council, and the sooner we can move to the latest census estimates, that will be very favourable for the council. But it's not just that. There are a number of mechanisms right across the scale. The extent to which council tax potential is factored into the allocations we receive in social care is a growing and concerning feature of the system as well. And I think the proposal to move forward on a fairer funder consultation first emerged in 2016, and we had some uncertainty, particularly coming into this summer, as to whether a consultation would move forward, deploying some of the services grant that was used last year in a fairer way. I have to say, at the moment, the commencement of that consultation seems further away than it has done for 2 or 3 years. So concerning prospects.
Tom, could you just explain a little more what you mean by the potential for council tax to be taken into account with social care funding?
Yes, in the allocations we receive for social care grants, some of those have regard to what we can raise through adult social care precept. So there is an adjustment at national level to push more of that funding towards areas that have lower council tax potential than areas such as Cambridgeshire. So again, that specific allocation is progressed on the basis that all areas will maximise their council tax potential, and it also starts from a premise that those services should be council tax funded, whereas, you know, looking back historically, there would have been a greater element of general taxation funding those services as well.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Stephen, I think you want to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments, very much on the same type of question Councillor Sanderson's raised, and members heard me say this, or some of this, at the previous meeting, but it's pertinent to this paper today and indeed for full council. I appreciate we've focused on core spending power increase and the fact that government were making headline statements around that on the assumption that full council tax flexibilities were being applied. In addition to which, government have been clear that they are encouraging councils to make use of their reserves. Now, as members will see from the papers, the council is committing reserves as part of the position to balance budget and invest in areas of need. But at the same time, we are still holding a prudent level of unallocated general reserves to make sure that the council is protected from events that can arise from time to time. I think it's really important to recognise that Treasury, so I'm not making this as a political comment, this is about Treasury, The Treasury's understanding of local government reserves and local government finances is fundamentally flawed. If the Treasury thinks the sector as a whole and this council as an individual authority can get by on making use of one-off money, that is not the answer to the long-term funding settlement that we or our residents deserve and need. This is the 5th year that this council has received a one-year settlement from government. It is wholly unacceptable. It means that we cannot plan for the long term, and to the point around the way the fair funding formula needs to be addressed, dealing with lag indicators that represent a population from 2013 or indeed data from 2001 in some cases is actually penalising Cambridgeshire. It's not just penalising this authority or indeed our district partners, it's penalising the communities we are all here to serve. So to my mind, we are doing everything government has asked us to do. We're using the flexibilities government considers it's given us. None of those flexibilities are easy or things we would necessarily want to do, but government hasn't dealt with its part of the equation effectively and continues to delay doing so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Richard and I have got you, Chris, and I will come back at the end. Richard.
I think what Councillor Count said, that we should have this debate at full council, is absolutely right, and we should respect his position. So I'm not going to enter into the debate. I'll just be listening to. I do want to say to Tom and through him to his colleagues, I'm really proud of what is brought forward here with the first ever sustainable procurement strategy. Of course, we want to go further and faster, but he and his colleagues know that. But it's a remarkable moment, and it is saying that what this council believes in terms of social and environmental objectives, we're actually putting our money where our mouth is, and I'm really proud of it. So I want to just place that on record. And secondly, I think 2 S&R meetings running, I've given advance notice of this question, and here we are. This is the time when I'm going to put it. And I just say this to Tom, give us an example where applying the triple bottom line assessment, that we're doing something because of social environmental reasons that we wouldn't have done, and where we're not doing something that financially we would have done, so that the committee, but also through us, the public, can see that this isn't just a strategy and a report and words, but actually we're making different decisions in how we spend our money. And I've given them lots of notice of that question.
Are you happy to answer it, Tom?
Yeah, I think there are, as Councillor Howard knows, I think there are, we're moving incrementally to progress this area, and it's important in itself to acknowledge and report the social and environmental impacts, and that in itself is a step forward. We always said at the start of the process, we need to have the kind of baseline data, and then we understand the different decisions that leads on to. I think in terms of the content of the proposals we have before us and how we've had a triple bottom line consideration, I'd draw attention to a couple of things. One of those is biodiversity net gain, which is actually positive across all 3 pillars. And I think the attention we've given that area and the priority it receives is a result of really recognising those triple impacts. And in terms of some of the more difficult decisions we've seen in the budget, particularly looking at capital and the way we've needed to reprioritise some of our education and schools programme, that really has taken account of where our demographic indications suggest we've got the strongest social need in that reprioritisation, and in focusing on what we deliver, we're increasingly building schools to the NZEB nearly zero standard. So recognising the environmental pillar, and also having in a number of places needing to step back from major construction projects and find other solutions has an environmental benefit as well. So those are some of the examples and the thinking that it's led on to as we've developed these plans iteratively.
Richard.
That was a clear and nice example, so thank you for that. But also just to make clear, there's full support and understanding that this is a major change, and that here we are in the first year of that change, There's been remarkable progress, which we want to place on record our thanks, but also a recognition that we can all do better again next year and the year after that. And if you're going to make a major change of this type, of course, it's going to take some years to get there, but a real transformation is happening. And I think the triple bottom line approach is one that I celebrate in this meeting for the advances that have been made.
Thank you. I think Stephen wants to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious I didn't have the opportunity to make this comment as part of my earlier contribution. I just wanted to make the point that we're of necessity focusing on the financial element of this paper, quite rightly so, but the paper in itself contains not just the budget, but the overall business plan proposed for the council, which will obviously be debated by full council, subject to the decisions of committee today. Whilst recognising that we have our medium-term financial strategy, capital strategy, treasury management approach and sustainable procurement strategy in here, I also wanted to reflect on the fact that we have a significantly revised strategic framework that presents very clearly the council's vision and 7 ambitions against which resources have now been allocated, including using the triple bottom line approach that Councillor Howitt's just referenced. I just wanted to make the point that that's quite progressive relative to where the council may have been, and indeed is progressive relative to a number of other county councils that we work closely with. On that basis, Chair, I just wanted to express my thanks to members of the corporate leadership team, finance, business planning and communications in particular, for all of their work to support this. Business planning and budgetary planning is always a challenge in any local authority, but during the year where we've had the significantly adverse impact of inflation, almost doubling the savings that were required for the next year, I think officers have worked immensely hard to get us to this position. And I'd particularly like to thank Tom Kelly and Stephen Howarth for their personal contributions to do that. I think what we have presented for member consideration today is very comprehensive, but also demonstrates a significant step forward in this authority's priorities and use of resource to deliver against them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will come back round for a second bite now. So Chris, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm sorry you didn't find it possible to bring me back straight away to just respond to your response. Let me first of all say that I'm deliberately raising this point at S&R. I'm not going to be raising it at full council because it's a more appropriate forum in which to discuss this point. And it's a valid point to raise. And I was really sorry to hear Councillor Machini suggest that any reference to the respondents in our survey about council tax, that somehow it's a joke. It's not a joke. They are quite serious in what they say and why they say it. And you yourself recognized the seriousness of the situation. The point that I was making, and I know you expanded it out to a much wider point, and I am very well aware of proposed county council increases in other county councils in 2-tier systems around the country. So I'm well aware of all of that, which you did allude to as well. But the point is that fewer than 0.1% of our population bothered to respond to our consultation, the online consultation. And do not accept that we lose credibility as an organization if we fail to take into account, and we fail to show that we've taken into account, the responses which are made by people. Now, I'm not saying for one second that any response which is made by fewer than 0.1% of our population therefore should determine what we do. But just brushing aside what it is that they say is not an appropriate response. And certainly suggesting it's a joke is most definitely not an appropriate response. So that is my challenge to you. And I know it's a difficult challenge, and I'm not going to say the same thing again at full council, but I think it's quite appropriate in S&R to talk about that, because we are meant to take into account what it is that our residents tell us. And if we want to get a better response in future, we need to show that we're listening to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roden. Councillor Count.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And as I said, I'll be saving my main things for the main debate at full council. However, I did say there were things that came up in the debate that I would perhaps comment on them. The first point is about the government taking into account the maximum council tax rise that you are proposing of just under 5% as part of the core spending increase. I'm really pleased that we are a local government. I'm really pleased that we have local decision making. Government doesn't instruct the council in that area. They used to try and instruct the local councils when they had 0%. Then they had a recommended 0%, and Cambridgeshire County Council, when I was leader, I'm proud to say, sorry, when Nick Clark was leader, I'm proud to say at that point in time was the first council to break that mandate because it was unaffordable for the Conservative-led county council at that point in time. But at other points in time, we have not gone with the maximum rate, as is clarified in the paper. So the point I'm making around that is it is local government that decides whether to go for that 44.99% or not central government. It's not an instruction. I'm pleased it's in the hands of local people. And I think that we have gone down that route before. We've gone down the maximum route before, but it's always incumbent on us as members to make that decision when it's necessary. And when it's not necessary, to spare the tax burden on the members of the public. So the second point I'd like to make is it's just a piece of clarification, really, because I believe that my colleague Chris Bowden is actually wrong on something, which is very rare. And I almost want to double check every last word before I go and say it, because he said that barely a fifth of the people supported the plans that you have to increase 4.99%. Wrong is actually the wrong word. Wrong is you didn't look at the wider surveys. So the statistically significant doorstep survey was 8%. 92% did not support this. I think that's worth mentioning. As you say, we may not be able to fully just follow what consultees offer up as opinions, but if we don't at least recognise the severity of difference between their opinion and where this council is currently going, and actually put on record that we've listened to that, it'd be a mistake. I thank Councillor Machini for actually acknowledging the huge amount of reserves that we left as a Conservative legacy, rather than the tale of the £60 million hole that other people refer to. And I'm glad to see that instead of putting money into reserves this year to tax people, you're actually spending some of them, which is something that we were suggesting last year. With respect to the spending of reserves, it is Treasury's view that the local government has too high reserves, particularly post-COVID, and they measure that at a national level. They actually saw what the reserves happened to the reserves last year. There was a significant amount of money got put into reserves. Cambridgeshire County Council was one of them. All right, and they said we can't really, on a national basis, give more money out when all people do is put them into reserves, which is what restricted the spending settlement. I do hope that they take note that Cambridgeshire County Council certainly in the future will not have those reserves to use, because basically they're part of the current spending plans. It's not a sustainable way to deal with things, but we do not need to be sitting on mountains of money that could be put to better use. For example, stopping a service cut, or to reduce council tax. So we'll hear more about that for council. And I am fully aware of the elements that are taken into account, particularly adult social care, 2%, not the 3% council tax rise. And last of all, the direct question you put to us as Conservatives chair regarding a referendum on council tax. I am absolutely delighted that for once you've acknowledged the value of having a referendum, because we know that one is coming to this council in the near future. And we have seen so many occasions where you and others have said referendums are not to be dealt with, they are worthless. So to have you once actually propose one, thank you, Chair.
I do just want to clarify, I think you've misunderstood what I said, and well, it'll be interesting to look back. What I said was that I didn't think that the Chancellor was going for a referendum on not on the cap on income tax allowances. I think he is not doing that. It was not that I was suggesting one. I was observing that that was not something which was being brought forward. But it will be interesting to see when we look back.
If I may, what you said was, I wonder what the Conservatives would think about having a referendum on an increase in income tax. That's what you said. You wondered what we think about having a referendum. So I'm glad to see that you actually believe that a referendum has its place.
I do not think referendums are a good way of making decisions. So let's move back to the discussion on the budget. I think Councillor Count has been very clear that he will not be supporting these recommendations, and I completely understand that. So my next question is, are we happy that we take all of the recommendations on block? And I'm seeing nods from around the room. So in which case we will move to a vote now on these recommendations. All those in favour of the recommendations as laid out on the papers, if you could indicate now. And all those against?
Chair, that's 8 votes in favour, 7 against. The recommendations are therefore carried.
Thank you. And having had that debate, I do want to just say again my very sincere thanks to all of the senior management team who have brought these papers to this stage. And I know it's been a really difficult year. And I'm going to have a particular mention in dispatches to Christine and Sue and the team who worked so hard on the strategic framework, which is very different this year from previous years, as well as to everyone who has been scraping around finding savings in difficult places. So thank you all very much indeed for all of your work on that. You will not be in the room, I don't think, while we're having a very long debate on that at full council. So now is our moment to make those grateful thanks clear. And I'm sure that that comes from the whole committee, because whatever the political discussions there will be, and those are completely right, we do, all of us, enormously value the efforts that you put into bringing forward a balanced budget every year. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We will now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Integrated Monitoring and Performance Report. And that's Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. As usual, this report presents the principal consolidated management accounts for the whole council for the current financial year, bringing together financial information that members will have seen in detail at the other policy and service committees. There are no recommendations accompanying this report other than to note and comment on it. So I'll instead summarize the key issues for you. So on the revenue side, and referring to the summary table at 1.1 of the main IFMR document, at the end of November, the council is forecasting an overspend of around 2.7 million or 0.6% of the budget. And that is a minimal reduction in the forecast from the previous report that we took to this committee. So within that number overall, there's some offsetting changes which are set out and described in the text in section 1. So running through those quickly. So pressure is projected within people services, particularly relating to home to school transport, which is seeing inflationary pressures above the general inflation rate and above the level for which budget has been provided this year. And that's particularly the case for transporting high needs children, with that budget line projecting a £2.1 million overspend. Some more information on that is given in section 1.3.2 of the report of the IFMR appendix, and this is one of the pressures that has required funding in the business plan item that you just discussed. Within adult services, forecast pressures within working age adult services, particularly learning disability, are offset by underspends projected within older people services. So growth in care costs for vulnerable adults is increasing by more than expected, reflected in increased allocations in the business plan as well. Now, for older people, we are particularly not seeing growth in care home spend that was expected when budgets were set. And again, this change is reflected in the business plan for next year as well. So offsetting these net increases, we've got funding for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which is a national grant process to compensate councils for costs linked to housing Ukrainian guests. The majority of this grant goes out to the district councils, but we can retain and do retain a portion to offset the costs that we are facing in this council. And that effect can be seen in the funding items line of that summary table. We continue to report pressure relating to the staff pay award for the current year within the finance and resources line, but that relates to the whole council. We are also continuing to report an underspend on capital financing, mainly relating to lower than expected borrowing costs, which we spoke about in some detail, I think, at the last committee. And more detail on the significant variances can be found as usual in Appendix 1 of that IFMR document. So the current forecast position on the revenue side allows for growth in our demand-led social care budgets through the last part of the year, given winter pressures. And members can see in the activity data tables within the narrative of 1.3 that numbers and unit costs of many types of care are increasing. Now, on the capital side, the council is currently forecasting an underspend of about 10.6 million or 7% of the capital programme budget. That's an increase from the previous month, 7.8 million. So an increase of around 3 million due to changes mainly within school schemes and now also forecasting some underspend on the overall place and sustainability capital programme. The detail of key scheme variances are in Appendix 2, and much of the underspend relates to phasing of spend. As there are no new funding changes generally for the committee to note, the only other aspect of this report is the usual update on the balance sheet position, which is in section 5, but there's nothing to specifically draw attention to there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Any comments or questions on this, Steve?
Yeah, I've two questions for officers, if I may, and then after I receive them, I do have some comments, but I'll need the responses first. So there's one is on page 566, Harry Smith College, Community College. It's late by 3 weeks, but rephasing of £500,000. Is that realistic that somehow only 3 weeks has caused a £500,000 rephasing? It seems difficult to get my head around that. The second one is on the is on page 562, going to Shire Hall, and I'm obviously going to be careful about what I say. When we discussed this last time, it was reported, and it's now in the it's in the notes, that the increase £400,000 on the pressure is because of the continued cost of running the old Shire Hall site. Can I ask what the run rate is at the moment? So how much per month is Shire Hall costing us because we're late in coming out? Thank you. Two questions.
Thanks, Stephen.
On the Harry Smith question, it's not something I've got more detail on to hand. The detailed commentary at 1G of that appendix does state that the delays, the underspend is due to that delay, and we can confirm that outside if that's helpful. And likewise, I don't have the numbers to hand on New Shire Hall run rate. I'm not sure if Tom Kelly does.
Yeah, so the cost is around 45k per month. That is predominantly business rates and the security costs. There's no service provision from that side.
Thank you, Chair. If I can go on to comments then on the on this paper. I've just lost my. Bear with me, please. The delay to Harry Smith is just one of the delays in the school projects. St Philip's Primary delayed, Soham Primary a year late, Alconbury Weald Special School a year late, so Harry Smith late, Camborne Village College late. I wanted to point these out because there's also in the document a £299,000 a year underspend on the use of temporary porter cabins. So in the budget papers that we saw earlier, there's a planned £1.1 million increase in the use of porter cabins. So I cannot help but to draw the obvious conclusion that because these are late, apart from the increase that they cost by being late, that £1.4 million worth of porter cabins will be used next year to teach our children in, rather than delivering the schools that they want on time. I'm sorry to read that, but that's the only way I can infer that. I'll go on further to another impact. St Ives Energy Grid late, North Angle Solar Farm late, Swaffham Prior Community Heat Scheme late, Babraham Smart Energy Grid over 6 months of delay, Fordham Renewable Energy late. In fact, over £10 million of works on these energy generating schemes delayed and late. Not only does that increase the cost of schemes, which we've seen, but we are losing huge sums of money from lost revenue from energy generation because these aren't being delivered on time. The only good thing about these is every single one of them was a Conservative project, as we heard about the solar farm earlier on. And whilst we were good at putting these down and laying the foundation blocks for them, it's a shame that this administration is failing to deliver them on time and on budget, because your financial position would be hugely different had you achieved that. And lastly, I'm really upset to see that the B1050 has been cancelled. The Conservatives put that in the budget and we knew it was opposed at that point in time. But when you took over, Peter MacDonald was the chair of Highways, and we asked him, are we safe with these projects that are in there? And he said, yes, I can guarantee you that. Well, I know he's been replaced, but we thought he was giving his word on the behalf of the joint administration, and that road needs doing, and it needs doing now. And that money was there, and you frittered the time away from then till now. It's late, it's going to go over budget, and it's just not good enough. Just not good enough.
Thank you. Lorna.
Thank you. To pick up on two of the points that have just been raised. Firstly, on the delays to projects, we all know that nationally and internationally there have been issues with capital projects, with supply chains, with all the rest of it, added to which, of course, in this country we have the B word that dare not speak its name. But in relation to these particular projects, there have been other issues. At Babraham, there has been the negotiation with Addenbrooke's about rephasing the works to enable greater use of and availability of car parking spaces while the works have been going on. That necessarily caused a delay in order to accommodate the wishes of the hospital and the staff there. In other schemes, there have been negotiations with landowners about way leaves. There have been negotiations with potential purchasers about power purchase agreements. All of those take time to get right, and you can't just bang through a negotiation because you've got to gather the agreement of people who actually have influence over this. So it's not surprising that some of these important and complex projects have been held up by the need to negotiate, discuss, do the right thing with other stakeholders in order to reach the point that they're reaching. It's not, nobody's just sitting on their thumbs. We are absolutely keen to get these cracking, and we are doing so as fast as those negotiations will allow us. The second point on the B1050, which is a road near me, which I use frequently, and yes, at the time that the budget was put forward, the last budget of the outgoing administration, it was in a desperate state, as it often is. And what has happened since then, and I don't know whether Councillor Count has noticed this, is that there have been some very extreme weather conditions, which now mean that many roads, and I can list them if you like, but Hill Road Causeway Haddenham, the B1381 Sutton to Chain Causeway down to Erith, Black Bank, 100-foot Bank, the road between Strait Furlong and 100-foot Bank, all of these roads and many more across the county are causing daily real worry and fear to residents and travellers using them because they are simply caving and collapsing. Part of that is the legacy of managed decline, which has been discussed in this authority for many years. But the extreme weather events have caused serious changes, serious caving, splitting, moving out to the sides of the underlying subsoil and then crumbling away. All of those things have happened in spades across the road network. That is not just an issue for us, it's an issue for Norfolk, it's an issue for Suffolk. Our officers are liaising with our neighbouring authorities and bringing a concerted effort to the Department for Transport to bring to their attention that this is way beyond the capacity of a maintenance budget of £30 million a year. I imagine £30 million might do one of those roads, certainly won't do all of them. Also, I raised it personally with the chair of the National Infrastructure Commission when he visited Cambridgeshire at the end of October. And I hope that that will feed its way into the thinking and advice of the National Infrastructure Commission. We have a desperately serious issue with those roads. And furthermore, the budget and works that were proposed for the B1050, it is now no longer clear would be sufficient to deal with the issues of the B1050, or indeed the right thing to do, because one of the things that happens if you just push more tarmac onto the top of roads is that you make the situation even worse. So there is a lot of thinking to be done about the B1050 and about all those other roads where people are now feeling they're taking their lives in their hands travelling, as I sometimes do. And all of that needs to be considered, not putting another £6-7 million into a piece of work that might not last the distance. And that's what we need to do in the case of the B1050, but also across the whole of the road network, is raise with government and continue to raise with government the huge nature of this issue, the extent to which it will get worse as weather becomes more extreme and we have very much wetter seasons and really dry seasons, shrinking and expanding the underlying subsoil. We've got to get a grip of that at a national level. We need to get resources at national level to be able to do the job right, not just do another patch job or another half job, which is effectively what's being proposed for the B1050, which just wouldn't last the distance and would make matters worse in the long term.
Thank you. Mark.
I'd just like to come back on one or two aspects of Lorna's speech there. Agree with most of it. The roads are in a disgusting state. The work that's required, if you look at 1.33 of this report, highways maintenance expenditure in a number of areas is low at present, is the first sentence it says. It goes on to talk about a lack of staff, etc., etc. When you have a gentleman on palliative care phoning you up because he can't sleep at night because the HGVs going past his house are thumping in and out of potholes, and those potholes haven't been done, I just asked a question. If everything you said is true, Councillor du Preez, why did the Highways Department allow their main contractor to close down 2 weeks over Christmas and not do any potholes repairs when the roads would have had less traffic on it, would have been less inconvenience to the people involved? I find that absolutely astounding, absolutely crazy in this environment at this moment in time. There are questions over many. I'm not on the Highways Committee, I'm a sub. It's not really my forte, but I am absolutely inundated with requests for road repairs at this moment in time. We're driving along the effect of cheese grater. That's what our roads are like at this moment in time. And, for all the goodwill and nice words and this, that, and the other, and the global this and the global that, right? We could predict this. Do you know what this winter's been? Typical, not climate change, typical. Summer, yes, I agree. But this winter has been cold. Well, guess what? Winters are traditionally cold. We get frost. We get a bit of snow, right? It's been traditional. We had a 2-week snap before Christmas and a two and a bit week snap now. The level of repairs on our roads is an absolute disgrace and needs to be #1 priority for the duration now, because quite frankly, people's lives are worse than a misery. They're actually being blighted by not being able to sleep because of them.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands on this item, so I'm going to speak very briefly on it, and then I'm going to assume that we have noted and commented on it. So just to say, I think that everybody in this room would probably agree that the state of our roads is truly awful and that it needs to be a high priority. But what I am absolutely not willing to do, and I think this is important given the discussion we've just had about council tax, I am not willing for us to spend more and more and more money pouring it into tarmac on roads when actually we find that 6 months, a year, 2 years later, there are the same cracks and everything is as bad as it has ever been in spite of spending millions of pounds. So we really need to have a serious review, and we are making progress on it about what the best way to deal with the extraordinary deterioration in our roads would be, because pouring more and more and more tarmac onto road surfaces, which 2 years later are as bad as they ever were, cannot be the answer. So I absolutely agree that there is a serious problem, and but it needs solutions which are not the same as simply pouring more and more and more tarmac in. It's been demonstrated that that is a hugely expensive problem, and I don't think, and I'm grateful to Lorna for all the work that's going into trying to get the national government attention on that issue. On the issue of capital delays, Councillor Count is right. There is an extraordinary frustration, particularly at the delays to the energy projects. And I do want to give credit to the Conservative administration for investing in making those decisions in those projects. Those were the right decisions. They were supported across the council. And it is extremely frustrating that there have been delays to those projects. We are doing everything we can to speed them up, but I hope that many in the public sphere will understand that there have been problems with supply chains for all sorts of reasons, not least issues with getting well, all sorts of reasons. I'm also not going to take any lectures from Councillor Count on delays to capital projects, because while I was leader of the opposition, delays to capital projects were a standard issue, and overspends on capital projects were also a standard issue. That does not mean it's fine. It is not fine, but it is not a new problem here. At which point I think I still don't see any further hands. So we will say thank you very much to Stephen for the integrated performance report. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think is the forward plan. So that's to Michelle, I think.
The only addition, obviously, to the forward plan is the item that we deferred today, which will come to your March meeting. Other than that, I have nothing else to add.
Thank you, Michelle. Which I believe brings us to the end of the public part of this meeting. Councillor.
And on the forward plan?
Yes, you can.
We've had a number of discussions, and your administration made a decision that the Farms Estate would report into this. I mean, I don't see it on the agenda plan. I see nothing about the Farms Estate at all on the agenda plan. It must be really welcoming to 200 plus tenant farmers that we've got out there.
Thank you, noted. I'll talk to Michelle about it. Thank you. Okay, I think that the next point on the agenda is the exclusion of the press and public. So I would now like to move to that point, and I need to read out the exclusion. So I'll do it from here.
Sorry to interrupt, but do we get a break? It's after 2 hours.
Can I read the exclusion of the press and public, and then we'll have, because then we need to close down the live stream, and then we will certainly have a break.
Indeed, thank you.
So we resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, as it refers to information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, and information in respect of which a claim for legal or professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. So can I see all those in favour of moving to closed session, please raise your hands.
Chair, before we vote, it's incumbent to have a debate on the subject, if so desired. We're allowed to speak on this subject before we move to a vote.
Okay, thank you. If you would like to speak on this subject, now is your moment.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, this covers 2 papers. One is on waste and one is on Shire Hall. On the waste one, I asked that the paper be split into those areas that shouldn't be confidential, separated out from those that was. That didn't happen, so I'll be voting against that. On the one on the Shire Hall, I have a statement to make. I have checked the statement with the monitoring officer. To the best of my knowledge, I will not be revealing anything of a confidential nature. Neither will I be putting anything involved in the paper at risk. However, my belief on this subject is so strong that I've checked. So I'm going to be very careful about what I say, but I'm going to read this prepared statement out.
Steve, can I just go to Linda, our monitoring officer, to check whether she's happy with this? Linda.
Yes, thank you for bringing me in, Chair. Both the Deputy Monitoring Officer and myself have been in discussion with Councillor Count in regard to this, and I did actually send him an email this morning, which I suspect he hasn't seen because he's probably travelling to this meeting. Having heard some comments earlier in this meeting, there had been one bit that I was a little bit concerned about, but I think that has now been covered off in the public domain. I am happy for Councillor Count to read the agreed statement and the proposal he's making within that statement, as long as he keeps to that statement and doesn't deviate. I think Councillor Count, as he stated, that you know that you have to keep to matters that are within the public domain. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Linda. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. And when considering how to respond to my statement, hopefully you'll understand that the same level of care regarding a response. Thank you. I've carefully prepared a statement as to why I object to the entirety of this paper being held under confidential session, and have carefully checked with what I will say with the monitoring officer in advance. Should anyone else wish to add further information, I hope that they have also taken this amount of care into consideration. I believe that information that could have been discussed was in the public interest to discuss, and requested that the paper be broken down into sensitive information in the appendix, confidentially separate from a non-confidential element that we could have discussed in open session. This was not allowed, and as such, I can only refer to information already in the public domain. Obviously, from the title of the published paper, this concerns Shire Hall. In the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report we discussed earlier, an additional £400,000 has been overspent due to delays in vacating Shire Hall. When the Conservatives in administration made the decision to move to hub and spokes model, this involved vacating Shire Hall. From that point onwards, there were multiple occasions when members of the parties that are now in administration, namely Liberal Democrats and Labour, repeatedly objected to leaving Shire Hall, and through motions and other means kept a high public profile as to problems with vacating. For example, former Labour councillor Scott publicly demanding that the decision to vacate be reversed. Last year, the current administration promoted material stating that new Shire Hall was not fit for purpose. In March 22 at SNR, the current administration took a paper to SNR querying whether new Shire Hall was fit for purpose. In September 22, the administration through SNR was finally forced to admit new Shire Hall was indeed fit for purpose. The actual delegation to agree final terms was delegated to officers in consultation with the chair and the vice chair of this committee. For clarity, that is the Liberal Democrat chair, Lucy Netzinger, and the Labour vice chair, Isa Machini. That original delegation was in July 2021, 20 months ago, 2 months after you formed the joint administration. As I said earlier, I believe there are elements being discussed today of significant public interest, but the argument against is commercial confidentiality. I therefore ask you, Chair, to commit to asking the monitoring officer to having a watching brief on this matter. Then as soon as the monitoring officer's opinion is there is no longer a need for this information to remain confidential, you commit to publication of this and prior relevant papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, Councillor Count. Having had no prior warning whatsoever about any of the content of that statement or that statement, I'm not going to make any commitments or any comments on it at this stage. I'm now going to revert to the discussion under that we were having about moving into private session. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment before we take the vote? Okay, so all those in favour of now moving into private session, if you could please indicate. And those against?
Chair, the result of the vote is 8 votes in favour, 7 against. The motion is therefore carried.
Thank you. And we will now move into private session, and we will take a 10-minute break, I would say. So perhaps we'll be back at 15:15. Thank you very much.